In 2018, I was given a choice. At school, if we read a certain amount of books, we were taken to Cece's Pizza, then the track in Branson, Missouri, and to finish up the day, the theaters. And by the way, the films were showing at an IMAX theater, just to add salt to the wound. The choice was either A Quiet Place or Avengers Infinity War. Me being 13 at the time, scary movies were at the bottom of my watch list, especially compared to the penultimate movie of the Infinity Saga. I'm not upset with my choice, but A Quiet Place has since been added to an ever-growing list of films I wish I could have seen opening weekend in the theater. The truth is, A Quiet Place is an entirely unique film. Its director came from an unlikely beginning. Its genre was twisted in a way to where the focus wasn't on the scares, but instead on the family that lives in the world. And that world, due to its characters and antagonist, is a unique experience in and of itself. And although the sequel was good, the fact that there were 2 more parts and a prequel confirmed has me a little worried for the future of this franchise. A Quiet Place Part 1 is a perfect opening. It establishes characters and relationships, but most importantly, the stakes. We see an abandoned town that has been overgrown for quite some time, just about 3 months. We see a family rummaging through an old store, but carefully so as not to make any sound. Pill bottles act as shakers. One wrong move and something terrible could happen. If something is almost dropped, characters will slide across the floor just to keep it from hitting the ground. Toys with batteries in them are treated like a live grenade with a pin removed. They have an urgent need to be deactivated, lest they all die. It's here we see the father of this story, played by John Krasinski, have a fairly confrontational approach to dealing with things. After all of this time protecting his family from these creatures, it appears that he has kind of forgotten how to be there for his family. Lee is very much present in their day-to-day lives. He takes care of them and watches out for them. But I think not being able to vocally speak has something to do with this. He's no longer a dad and more of a caretaker to his kids. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with having a space shuttle toy, which Reagan sees. Though she didn't think to watch Bo and make sure he doesn't take the batteries with him. This is the catalyst for the family tension that makes A Quiet Place so interesting. Every family member is feeling guilt for the death of Bo, and they're living off fear that it may happen again if they're not careful. Firstly, Lee feels he could have gotten to Bo faster, if only he'd given his all to save his kid. Evelyn voices that she wished she could have put the bag down or at least carried Bo back to the house. However guilty the parents may feel, none of them will ever feel nearly as terrible as Reagan does. She's the reason Bo even had the toy in his hand to begin with, and then she left without thinking to double check on him. Because Lee is in full survival mode, the right amount of love and care has not been shared with his daughter, or any of his other kids for that matter. Lee doesn't blame Reagan for what happened, but doesn't quite know how to tell her that. In the waterfall scene, Marcus says, just talk to her, which is like the most good boy answer, but it just kind of goes to show how simple of a solution it really is. In the end, Lee gives his life as a sacrifice to save his kids, and before he does so, he makes sure not only to tell Reagan and Marcus goodbye, but to reassure Reagan that he has always loved her. It's a beautifully well-acted, well-written, and well-shot sequence that displays the love of a father perfectly. We've seen a previous scene that Reagan has a hard time believing her father actually cares, and she sees it more as a half-hearted thing Lee is saying simply because he is her dad. It's not until Lee's final scene that we see her fully understand his love for her. It's a shame they couldn't have made it up sooner, but it's still beautiful that the final glimpse that they shared was a positive one, albeit with some sad undertones. After Lee gives his life for his family, we're shown a few different sequences that eventually lead to the Abbott family being cornered in a basement, where Reagan realizes the Death Angel's weakness. It was set up earlier a few different times that there was this interesting dynamic between electromagnetic waves and the Death Angels, but it all clicks into place in this final sequence. Reagan then starts one of my least favorite trends in the entire franchise and slams her cochlear implant into the microphone to ultimately weaken and kill the angels. The movie ends with more Death Angels on the way, but the Abbotts are ready, shotgun in hand, locked and loaded. It's the perfect ending. The audience remains hopeful that this family will survive. We piece together a future that sprouts from this ending. Slowly but surely, the Abbotts kill the Death Angels until there's none left. Perhaps they found a way to blast the frequency, hunting down the last of the aliens. We're excited for this future, but we're also content with what we've gotten. A satisfying film about a family overcoming grief through a common trial. And then, 2 years later, at the height of our own apocalypse, we get a sequel and an announcement that more films are on the way. I'm not saying having sequels to a film is bad. What I am saying is not every single movie needs to be continued. A Quiet Place is a very strange balance of that line. On one hand, A Quiet Place Part 1 ended in a very satisfying way that left you wanting more, but not necessarily needing it. And on the other hand, John Krasinski created such a captivating world, it would have been a waste of potential to not explore it at least a little further. A Quiet Place Part 2 struck that balance between both sides. It explored how the world outside of the Abbott family was affected by the Angels of Death, and to further explore the relationships and struggles of the Abbotts, the family that we grew to love in the first film. Through interesting scenarios, we fear for the safety of our protagonist as well as the MacGuffin that we learned about in the previous film. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a movie that was planned. John Krasinski was originally not going to have a sequel, and it kind of shows. Now, before I talk a little bit more in depth on why I don't like A Quiet Place Part 2, I want to reassure you that I did enjoy it. I actually adore the opening scenes of A Quiet Place Part 1 and how it showcases action from the perspective of our different characters. The wonder that follows Lee around displays this ever-present fear that looms over his shoulder. The wonder of Evelyn as she drives through the chaos shows the fear in her eyes, and behind the eyes, her determination to get the kids to safety. But perhaps the greatest moment in the whole franchise so far is Reagan's POV. It showcases the confusion that comes with being deaf in a noisy world. Everything around her is figuratively blowing up, and she has almost no clue what's going on because she can't hear anything. It's also the complete opposite of why the rest of the two films have such an impact. In this universe, we get so used to everything being quiet that when a loud noise such as glass bottles rattling or a toy space shuttle wailing, it makes us jump or fear for the future of our protagonists. Whereas in the brief scene over Reagan's shoulder, we see the fear on her face as the world is so loud and hers is so quiet. The whole opening scene is one of the few redeeming factors to A Quiet Place Part 2. A lot of the time in horror movies, to build the tension and drama, the protagonists often do extremely dumb things. Things like freaking out and dropping keys, running really slowly, tripping over your feet, not watching where you're stepping, as well as some countless other things that prohibit them from doing what it takes to survive. It's one of the many reasons that horror films are often not looked at in a serious light, because it's hard to believe something that doesn't make sense. The human characters in horror stories are what grounds the film in relatability. That's what makes horror movies like The Thing so good. You may have this fantastical creature that is an expert at munching on humans, but the humans are also experts at thinking outside of the box and creative ways to overcome their trials. A Quiet Place Part 1 follows the great horror film rules. It keeps its creatures mysterious. The protagonists that have been living in this world long enough know better than to scream. They have silent Monopoly pieces, sand pathways to walk on, and a fireworks system to deter the creatures when Evelyn is giving birth. Of course, the protagonists make simple mistakes now and then, like knocking over lanterns or not keeping an eye on the little one. But in A Quiet Place Part 2, they do so many dumb things, it's hard to believe that they're even the same family that's been living in this silent apocalypse for a whole year and a half now. Marcus fails to watch his step and wanders into a bear trap. Marcus fails to put the towel over the furnace door, which nearly kills him and his younger sibling. Reagan wanders out on her own, not knowing if she's making any noise because she's deaf. And Emmett doesn't know how to remove a noose from his neck, a knot that slides both ways when not under tension. But none of these are nearly as sinful as the one of my least favorite tropes. Why on earth does every horror protagonist take so long to pull the trigger? Like, hey Reagan, your uncle is literally about to die to an angel of death right in front of your face, but to build up traumatic tension, you need to slowly walk back with your cochlear implant in hand, slowly move your hand from one side of your body to the other, and then when the implant is 5 inches away from the microphone, pull up your arm and slam it down. Yeah, that will get them. That will show those angels of death who's boss. Yeah, girl, you totally slammed your secret weapon into a microphone and killed him and stuff. She does it in the first film at the very end. It was the trend I mentioned earlier. And I know it's meant to build tension, to feel powerful over these creatures they've struggled with for a year, but like, come on. It's like, bro, just put the implant to the mic. Your uncle is bleeding out and you have a death angel in your face. Please just do the logical thing and kill it ASAP without damaging the implant by slamming it into the mic. All those examples just to prove the point that A Quiet Place Part 2 falls into the standard horror trap. But why did it falter after its amazing predecessor? And why am I worried for this franchise's future like I said in the title? It's simple. Stakes. We established at the end of the first film that there was a way to kill these creatures, and that more were on the way after they heard the gunshot. So why are these characters so scared? If an angel of death is coming at you, you simply turn on the amp and the mic. Once they get close, move the implant to the mic and fire. But instead, in the second one, they opt to run away from the danger. In other words, the filmmakers removed the stakes from the first film, and to make up for that, they dumbed down the characters to make the stakes feel higher in the second film. It's exactly what makes nearly all thriller sequels so weak compared to the first. If there aren't any stakes, you don't feel the tension in the drama, and it's no longer a scary movie, and more so just a moving pictures on the screen. It's hard to get behind why the Abbotts are struggling so much because you're just too busy thinking, well, why don't you just do the logical thing and kill them before they have a chance to kill you? The real reason I'm worried for the future of this franchise is because it's going to be near impossible to continue this story without the characters being dumb to get themselves in stressful situations. A Quiet Place Part 1 had a beautiful ending. A Quiet Place Part 2 had stretched its concept to the absolute limit, and in the end did an alright job at wrapping up the story we've been following. A Quiet Place Part 2 and 3? I don't really know. I don't know, man. And that brings me to my conclusion. A Quiet Place Day 1 is going to be interesting. The characters will get a small pass for doing illogical things simply because it's their first day dealing with this. My guess is it's going to be a lot less of a drama and more of a horror film. I'm speculating it's going to cover different scenarios that happened at Ground Zero, further expanding what we saw at the beginning of A Quiet Place Part 2. I am excited for Day 1, mostly because I'll get to see it in theaters, unlike its predecessors, but also because I love this world that has been crafted in front of us. I'm curious to see where the filmmakers went with it, as well as if my worries come true. The week after A Quiet Place Day 1 hits theaters, my review will be up on July 5th, so you can subscribe if you don't want to miss out on that. And that pretty much sums up my thoughts on A Quiet Place Part 1 and 2. I'm so thankful for those that sit all the way to the end of these. If you enjoyed today's video, sending it to a friend and leaving a like is greatly appreciated. And if you haven't seen the movies yet, go watch it and see what you think. Your own opinion will always, sometimes, be more important than mine.